Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Resolved that God's existence is a logically demonstrable fact. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, existence is a state of being real, known, or recognized. Anything that is logical is characterized by or capable of clear and sound reasoning. A fact is a thing that is known or proved to be true. A logically demonstrable fact is something known or proved to be true that is characterized by clear and sound reasoning. God's existence is demonstrable via the ordinary method of scientific inference, specifically through natural theology, which is the science of demonstrating his existence using evidence and logic. Natural theology goes back at least to the ancient philosopher Aristotle. A high point in natural theology was Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, which are scientific arguments for God's existence. God's existence is and must be provable via ordinary methods of science by the pattern of evidence logic inference. You cannot prove that anything exists merely by logic. The proof must be backed with evidence. And it is so with God's existence. It cannot be proven by mere logic or reason alone. I will now present some contentions to support my argument. First, if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Many theists and atheists agree on this point. Friedrich Nietzsche, the great atheist of his time, who proclaimed the death of God, understood that the death of God meant the destruction of all meaning and value in life. I think that he was right. On the atheistic view then, some actions, say rape, may not be socially advantageous, and so, during human development, becomes a taboo. But that does nothing to prove that rape is wrong. On the atheistic view, there is nothing wrong with rape. Thus, without God, there is no absolute right and wrong. But the problem is that objective values do exist, and deep down we know it. There is no more reason to deny the objective reality of moral actions like rape, cruelty, and child abuse are not just socially unacceptable behavior, they are moral abominations. Some things at least are really wrong. Similarly, love, equality, and self-sacrifice are really good. The summary is this. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. However, objective values do exist, and therefore God exists. Next, God must have created the universe, and evidence supports this. Stephen Hawking, a great physicist, estimated that if the rate of the universe's expansion had been smaller by even 1 part in over 100 million, the universe could have recollapsed into a hot fireball. Brandon Carter calculated that the odds against the initial conditions being suitable for later star formation, without which planets could not exist, is 1 followed by over 1,000 billion zeros at least. P.C.W. Davis estimated that a change in the strength of gravity of the weak force by only 1%. There are around 50 such quantities and constants present in the Big Bang, which must be fine-tuned in this way if the universe is to permit life. So improbability is multiplied. There is no physical reason why these constants and quantities possess the values they do. The former agnostic physicist Paul Davies comments, "Through my scientific work, I have come to believe more and more strongly that the physical universe is put together with an ingenuity so astonishing that I cannot accept it merely as a brute fact." Also, Robert Jastrow, the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, has called this the fact that around 50 such quantities must be fine-tuned in this way for the universe to permit life, the most powerful evidence for the existence of God to ever come out of science. The summary is that the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe is either due to natural law, chance, or design. However, based on my previous point, we can see that it's not due to either law or chance. Hence, it is due to design by God. To end with, according to Anselm's ontological argument, if God exists as an idea in the mind, but does not necessarily exist in reality, then we can imagine something greater than God. But we cannot imagine something that is greater than God. Thus, if God exists in the mind as an idea, then God necessarily exists in reality. God really does exist in the mind as an idea, and therefore God necessarily exists in reality. Thank you.
The affirmative first speaker mentioned that if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. This is a prime example of causation and correlation. What is the direct relationship between God and morality that warrants the argument that one cannot exist without the other? On the topic of use of correlation and causation, the affirmative first speaker stated that if God exists in the mind as an idea, then God necessarily exists in reality. So does that mean that anything that exists in the mind as an idea exists in reality? The affirmative first speaker also mentioned that the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe is due to either natural law, chance, or design. And then she went on to say that it's not due to either natural law or chance, hence is due to design by God. Why were natural law and chance ruled out as possible causes without sufficient evidence?
The supporting team in the first part of their argument. But can this be said about the existence of the God worshipped by the Abrahamic religions? I cannot help but disagree. A big mistake in this argument would be to only limit the criticism of the existence of the supreme being to the Christian God. There is plentiful evidence to support the fact that the Christian deity we know today has roots from the Abrahamic God, Yahweh, conceived by the Israelites. The Israelites originally worshipped four gods, El, Yahweh, Asherah, and Baal, and we know this because the Bible contains many references to deities other than Yahweh. The Old Testament features all four gods, their followers, and even contests to prove whose God was supreme. It took a traumatic crisis to make Yahweh into the all-powerful creator of the world. In 605 BCE, Israel was conquered by Babylonia, and the Israelites were taken as captives. They concluded that only one of their four gods was the right one, and that the captivity was the punishment for worshipping the other gods. They settled on Yahweh and started worshipping him alone. This was the birth of Judaism. The Abrahamic God appears first in around 1000 BCE in the Torah as a revengeful character. We can hypothesize that this is because the writers of the Torah lived in a brutal society with the law of retaliation and cruel punishments. So they imagined their God this way. In around 30 CE, Jesus was introduced as the founder of Christianity. He taught that God was a loving God. He could have declared the old God obsolete and introduced the new God as the right one, but this would not have earned him many followers and would have been punishable by death as blasphemy. So Jesus preferred to use the existing. So this is how he entered the New Testament. This scripture was added to the Torah, yielding the foundation of the Bible we know today. 700 years after Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad founded the religion of Islam. This religion took over some of the concepts of Christianity, such as the loving God, but the main inspiration for Islam was probably Judaism, because the Muslim God is as brutal as the original one of the Torah. As we can see, the gods and their variations, not excluding the Abrahamic deity, are man-made. And because man's thinking is flawed, why would the existence of a God be irrefutable and true? The existence of God is questionable because he is man-made. God did not create humans. Humans created God. Human beings are capable of being ethical and moral without believing a deity. Moral standards are required for the proper functioning of society, and this can and should be achieved by developing morality through reason, experience, and scientific inquiry, rather than through faith in a supernatural realm or source. Theists believe that universal moral standards are required for the proper functioning of society, but they falsely believe that God is the only possible source of such standards. Philosophers have demonstrated that it is possible to have a universal morality without God. Investigation of the brain areas involved when humans reason about moral issues show that moral reasoning is related to both seeing things from other people's point of view and to grasping others' feelings. Deladen provides examples of how science uses empirical evidence to access the fact that specific behaviors have on the well-being of individuals and society concerning moral issues. Scientific evidence supports the decriminalization and regulation of drugs, the morality of abortion, euthanasia under some circumstances, and the permission of homosexuality. Okay. Stephen Hawking himself claims that there is no place for a God in theories on the creation of the universe, and that spontaneous creation is the reason that there is something. He concludes that the Big Bang was an inevitable consequence of the laws of physics, and because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Dr. Lee Rayfield said science can never prove the non-existence of God, just as it can never prove the existence of God. Yet, the latest advances in cosmology explain why the laws of the universe seem tailor-made for humans, without the need for a benevolent creator. Today, we know of hundreds of other solar systems and know that there are countless more. Planets of all sorts exist, and when the beings on a planet that supports life examine the world around them, they are bound to find that their environment satisfies the conditions they require to exist. Theists use these coincidences as evidence of the work of God, but the idea that the universe was designed to accommodate mankind appears in theologies and mythologies dating from thousands of years ago. The Old Testament contains the idea of providential design, but the traditional Christian viewpoint was also greatly influenced by Aristotle, who believed in an intelligent natural world that functions according to some deliberate design. This is not supported by modern science. As recent advances in cosmology suggest, the laws of gravity and quantum theory allow universes to appear spontaneously from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists and why we exist. There is no need for a supreme being to set.
Ms. Dimawong with her closing.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, the question here is to prove that the existence of God is a logically demonstrable fact. The negative opening speaker said that there is plentiful evidence to support the fact that the Christian deity we know today has roots from Abrahamic gods, Yahweh conceived by the Israelites, and that there are variations of God. With all that, doesn't it prove that there is indeed a God even with the variations? For the fact that they started worshiping their God, it had to have come from somewhere, and something must have made them believe, no? Don't you think that God was not an idea adopted by their mind, but the experiential reality which gave significance to their lives? He also said that human beings are capable of being ethical and moral without religion or belief in a deity, and they carry out their ethical and moral acts. But according to Aquinas' meta-ethics, human goodness depends on performing acts that are in accord with our human nature. But what sort of acts are those? In other words, what feature or features serve to distinguish these human acts from acts of a different kind? Regarding the Big Bang Theory, typically atheists have said that the universe is just eternal and uncaused, but the astrophysical evidence indicates that the universe began to exist in a great explosion called the Big Bang 15 billion years ago. Anthony Kenny of Oxford University urges, a proponent of the Big Bang Theory, at least if he's an atheist, must believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. But surely that doesn't make sense. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So where did the universe come from? Why does the universe exist instead of just nothing?
Okay, so for the affirmative, my question is in regards to your contention that objective morality exists and so God exists. Do you disagree that it is possible to have a set of universal standards for morality without being in a higher power? And do you also recognize that a person who does not believe in God is not predisposed to murder, and likewise they can feel and believe in a deep sense of honesty, love, and justice? Across human nature, there are sets of morals that are seen as good and bad. For example, killing would be seen as bad, whether it was written in scripture or not. So do you acknowledge that criteria set by social norms also determine an action to be right or wrong, or that objective morality could be based on biology in that humans developed a hardwiring for what is right or wrong out of a sense of what is good for survival? And for the negative, my question, You assume that God is man-made because different groups bring up different variations of their God to fulfill different purposes. If something is man-made, does that mean that it can't be logically demonstrable?
To recapitulate, existence is the fact or state of living or having objective reality, and according to philosophy, the ontological property of being. A logically demonstrable fact is one that can be shown to be true under all interpretations of its logical components, or to simply exist without argument. Like the negative first speaker stated, humans made God and not vice versa. Hence, the existence of God is not a logically demonstrable fact. The proponents of this resolution spoke heavily on the link between God and morality. They made big claims, such as morality cannot exist without God. Is religion really necessary for morality? The answer is no. Moral standards are needed for the society to function properly, and this can and should be achieved by developing morality through reason, experience, societal acceptance, and scientific inquiry, rather than through belief in a supernatural being. Looking into society's changing opinions on issues like animal rights, abortion, international aid, homosexuality, and so on, we can see that they have not come from religion, but from careful reflection on humanity and what society considers beneficial. As we can see from the history of God illustrated by the negative first speaker, gods and their variations, such as the Greek, Roman, Celtic, Abrahamic deities, and so on, are man-made and tailor-made to suit the emotional and societal needs of humans.
To summarize, if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist, but they do exist as seen in socially unacceptable behaviors. Therefore, God exists. Also, the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe is due to either natural law, chance, or design. Since it's not due to either law or chance, it's due to design, as there are around 50 such quantities and constants present in the Big Bang, which must be fine-tuned in a way for the universe to permit life. So improbability is multiplied by improbability until our minds are really in incomprehensible numbers. Therefore, there is no physical reason why these constants and quantities possess the values they do. Fred Hoyle, an English astronomer, remarks, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. And Robert Jastrow, the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, has called this the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. Thank you.
So in closing, I have decided to side with the negative in that God's existence isn't a logically demonstrable fact. They provided a clear, concise, and convincing argument. I support that God is man-made. The criticism of God should not be limited to only the Christian God, and the negative first speaker gave a detailed summary of the history of God. It was interesting to see how the role and description of God changed according to the emotional needs of humans. This further strengthened their argument. She also mentioned that human beings are capable of being ethical and moral without belief in a deity. Like I mentioned previously, across human nature, there are sets of morals that will be seen as good or bad, whether they were written in scripture or not.